Hello, everyone. Welcome to Astrologer Climate Witness tonight. I am going to be reading a couple of articles. One has to do with how we are currently living in an oligarchy and have been for quite some time, decades. And also another article that shows that the oil companies have known for a very long time that burning fossil fuels was going to cause climate change. And as I have described here before, our main issue, the over umbrella issue, isn't really just climate change. It's the fact that we are in planetary overshoot and have been for a very long time. But it will show that the oil companies have tried with all their might to stop any kind of action at all that would have at least slowed or mitigated much of the destruction that's happened. And because of their product, that helped push overshoot because of the massive use of it to make consumer products and industrial agriculture. People say, well, we have to eat. The thing is, it sounds crude, but the more food we make, the more people we make. And then we have to make more food, and then more people, and then more food. If we had, and we did more or less understand this long ago, but when certain people make money, profit off the destruction or the orientations of progress, then it doesn't stop. There's no management of the situation. There's no introspection from our species, from those at the top or anyone else, to say, wait, what are we doing? We don't have to let people starve, but you change the culture and you change behavior so that there aren't so many people that have to eat. I didn't think I was going to go in that direction when I started this, but let me continue. I'm going to read an introduction I wrote, and we shall see if that helps. Okay. Are you feeling it? The paradigm shift of Pluto and Aquarius? More probably not so much, but let's go back just a bit and discuss this. Did we do Pluto and Capricorn? I mean, yes, Pluto and Capricorn happened, but exactly how did it turn out? Pluto equals or symbolizes death, regeneration, and rebirth. So Capricorn is about how civilizations organize themselves in order to function, how our institutions and societal norms help us to function as a species. Okay, so did we reform these aspects of society during Pluto's stay in Capricorn? Look around. Is there still mass disparity between the classes? Because that's the biggie with Pluto and Capricorn. Oh, yes, there is. It is wider and worse. Like as wide as the Grand Canyon than it was before Pluto and Capricorn. So then, which expression of Pluto won? I would say the power over, not empowerment. That's the key with Pluto. Are you going to use it to power over, or are you going to use it to empower? I don't see any real empowerment that has taken place, especially anything that would offset our predicament. So there were no takedowns of powers that be, no revolution. The oligarchs won. They were in power and they are still in power. Now, you say, well, revolution is mostly an Aquarian thing, so now we will revolt. Okay, we have 20 years of Pluto in Aquarius, but all the while it is in Aquarius, the planet is on a trajectory, one that is already killing the biosphere. So Pluto in Aquarius with oligarchy in charge, or anyone else really at this point, can be about innovation, okay, right, and about scientific progress, right. But with Pluto here, we are still deciding about power. Pluto is representative of power. So now that power takes the form of technology with AI, which is moving toward becoming a force in the world. It is already in power now through those who are pushing and developing and financing that power, AI. We do not even know where that is heading, but we do know how things have developed in the past, and well, the circle has come all the way around. When you consider the United States was born with Pluto and Capricorn, the very end of Pluto and Capricorn. So it is true that much of what I've read, especially from books like A People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn and others, that even though the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution was set up somewhat to equalize power among the people, it was still developed to have the top echelon to be in control, because Capricorn is all about control, correct? So it was the French who revolted when Pluto was in Aquarius. We had already done it. We did it toward the end of Capricorn. So where does this leave us? Will AI actually become some kind of savior of humanity? Free us from the physical and mental limitations that some feel curse the human species? Well, people have differing opinions on this, but I say if you look at a different branch of science, and one will come to a different understanding of how AI has no power to take us out of the reality we have created for ourselves. There is no getting around the fact that people will die as a result of the ecological destruction that has occurred and will be occurring. So the trajectory is on. You cannot reverse it, even though now you have some scientists who are saying we can, but what's going to happen if you're having hurricanes and floods and droughts and ocean acidification, the coral reefs dying, which help with the balance of the oceans, okay? You can't have all the coral reefs dying, forget it. I mean, the oceans will be gone. You can't have all these things happening and still have a lot of people still going about their business, going to the mall. It doesn't work like that, okay? There are consequences to these things that happen on a mass scale, because it's going to be happening larger and more frequently and more systemically in our ecosystems, okay? Systemic, that is the key word. Got to remember that word, okay? All right, now, that's my little introduction. I am now going to read all about oligarchy, okay? My cat wants to come in. Just a minute. I'll be right back. Shut the door. Okay. So, a little cold out there for him. Here we go. What does oligarchy mean? That we're screwed. Common dreams. Now, this particular article was written in 2019, but there was one way back in like 2010, could have been 2012, in which they discussed an actual scientific article or study that showed that we were in an oligarchy, not a complete democracy. Okay, here we go. This one kind of works pretty good, so I didn't bother to go all the way back to see. Oh no, it's not opening. Are you kidding? Hi. My messenger's been acting up a lot lately. Don't know why. Hold on, let's see if this works. We shall see if this works. Better. Oh my god. Huh. It's not working. Okay. Let's see. I'm going to have to look for it again. Oh, here we go. This might have. All right, here we go. I got it. Okay. What does oligarchy mean? That we're screwed. The typical American has no influence at all. Now, some of you are going to say, well, of course we knew that, but just let me read. Oligarchy means government of and by a few at the top who exercise power for their own benefit. It comes from the Greek word oligarchos, meaning few to rule or command. Even a system that calls itself a democracy can become an oligarchy if power becomes concentrated in the hands of a very few wealthy people. A corporate and financial elite. Their power and wealth increase over time as they make laws that favor themselves. You've got to keep that in mind. People say, oh, they got rich because they worked and they did this and that. No, they bend the system to favor themselves, okay? They manipulate financial markets to their advantage and create or exploit economic monopolies that put even more wealth into their pockets. Modern-day Russia is an oligarchy, where a handful of billionaires who control most major industries dominate politics and the economy. What about the United States? According to a study published in 2014 by Princeton professor Martin Gilens and Northwestern professor Benjamin Page, although Americans enjoy many features of democratic governance, such as regular elections, and freedom of speech and association, American policy making has become dominated by powerful business organizations and a small number of affluent Americans. The typical American has no influence at all. This is largely due to the increasing concentration of wealth. In a 2019 research paper, remember this article was put out in 2019, so we didn't even get to 2024 yet and what happened. In 2019 research paper, Berkeley economics professor Gabriel Zucman determined that the richest 1% of Americans now own 40% of the nation's wealth. That's up from 25 to 30% of the nation's wealth in the 1980s. The only country Zucman found with similarly high levels of wealth concentration is Russia. America has had an oligarchy before, in the first Gilded Age, which ran from the 1880s until the early 20th century. Teddy Roosevelt called that oligarchy the malefactors of great wealth and fought them by breaking up large concentrations of economic power and the trusts and instituting a progressive federal income tax. Progressive income tax. That's the key word right there. Meaning the more you make, the more you pay. Okay? Because number one, people forget. These large, massive companies aren't making their own roads or educating their own people. We don't want them to do that anyway. Or, making their own hospitals. In other words, they're not making the infrastructure that they themselves use to make money with their products, etc. Remember that. There's a government behind all that, or they'd have to do their own. And we wouldn't want that anyway, because that would really be a feudal system, like the old days when a castle had its army and it could shut off a bridge and only certain people could use it, or something along those lines, okay? Okay. His fifth cousin, Franklin D. Roosevelt, further reduced their power by strictly regulating Wall Street and encouraging the growth of labor unions. Yes. The oligarchy fought back, but Roosevelt wouldn't yield. Government by organized money is just as dangerous as government by organized mob, he thundered in 1936. Never before in all our history have these forces been so united against one candidate as they stand today. They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred. But the American oligarchy has returned. We are now in a second Gilded Age. As the great jurist Louis Brandeis once said, we can have democracy in this country, or we can have wealth concentrated in the hands of a few, but we cannot have both. We must, once again, make the correct choice and reduce the economic and political power of the American oligarchy. Well, I don't think that's going to happen. That was the end of that. Okay. So I'm just trying to make the point that nothing's changed. People are more aware of class struggle, the hierarchies and the disparities between us. People are more aware. But what to do about it? People have kind of some of the wrong ideas about it because, I mean, look who's running the show. I mean, it's always been like that for a long time now, but it's getting worse. Nobody's fixing it. Don't think people are fixing it with who's in charge now. Okay? Now, the next article is long. Okay? But it's very important. Hopefully I can open this one, but I might have to look for it again. But I know where to find it. Here we go. I don't know why this is not working. Okay. I don't think that's going to work either. I think. Where did I find that? Oh, I think I know. I'm going to have to go. I think it's Counterpunch that I found it on. Let's see. Yes, I do believe it was Counterpunch. I tried to have it available right away on my messenger, but I couldn't open it. Sorry, folks. Be with you in a moment. Oh, that might be in the archives already because that was a few days ago. Hold that. Oh, here we go. I got it. All right. Big Oil told 70 years ago that fossil fuel emissions could impact civilization. That's written by Rebecca John. Okay. April 6, 1955 was a perfect spring day in Los Angeles. Downtown, the skies were unusually smog-free as Lorne B. Hitchcock, president of the Air Pollution Foundation, made his way up the marble steps of the city's exclusive California Club for a meeting with some of the West Coast's most powerful businessmen. Waiting inside the club's oak-paneled rooms were top executives from California's major oil companies. They were the Air Pollution Foundation's largest funders, and they were not happy. As the foundation's president, it was Hitchcock's job to oversee a research program aimed at solving Southern California's escalating smog crisis. A crisis that had provoked mass protests throughout Los Angeles County only a few months before. Determined to tackle every possible source of smog, Hitchcock was investigating the region's numerous oil and gas refineries. On top of this, he was publicly demanding action to curtail air pollution across the state, angering the members of the industry's oldest lobby group, the Western States Petroleum Association, WSPA, then known as Western Oil and Gas Association, WOGA. Several weeks earlier, the foundation had also published a report containing the bombshell warning that carbon dioxide emissions from fossil fuels could have considerable long-term consequences on civilization. Displeased, WSPA's senior leaders summoned Hitchcock to the California Club where they reprimanded him, spelling out in no uncertain terms exactly what they expected in return for their hefty financial contributions. Over lunch, WSPA's oilmen criticized Hitchcock for supporting pollution controls across California, for drawing attention to refinery pollution, and for conducting too broad a program of research. Instead, they told him they had formed the Air Pollution Foundation to be protective, that Hitchcock should serve as the research director for the oil industry, and the foundation should publish findings which would be accepted as unbiased, where the oil industry's findings were not seen as trustworthy. This frank exchange, reported in detail by Hitchcock in a never-before-seen memo, unmasked the strategic motivations behind Big Oil's sponsorship of air pollution research. Alongside dozens of other newly obtained documents, the memo showed that the 1950s LA was ground zero for a tactic that has since become a key element of the oil industry's PR playbook, funding a third-party community front group to sponsor and publicize research aimed at downplaying or denying the harmful impacts of burning fossil fuels. So listen to that over again, so I don't have to read it over, but that's a very important little part right there. Hiring a third party, funding a third party community front group to sponsor and publicize research aimed at downplaying or denying the harmful impacts of burning fossil fuels. That's exactly what the tobacco company did. Okay. Following Big Oil's intervention, the Air Pollution Foundation's reports refer to CO2 as innocuous. Since the 1950s, oil and gas companies have repeatedly used front groups to influence public opinion, block clean air and regulation, and stall climate action. The deceptive tactic, rooted in California history, is a major focus of climate litigation currently progressing through the state's courts. Ironically, this strategy designed to protect oil and gas producers from local air pollution controls led to WSPA members being informed in 1954 of a far greater potential danger resulting from their operations: global climate change. This month, the 70th anniversary of researchers warning Big Oil about the risk of climate change, atmospheric carbon dioxide is 50% higher than before the Industrial Revolution. Record-breaking heat waves, violently destructive storms, wildfires, drought, and flooding are all increasing due to the effects of greenhouse gas-induced climate change. Yet in meetings held behind closed doors over multiple decades, oil and gas executives have consistently decided to deny, dismiss, or downplay D&D. What's that? Sounds like something else was going on recently that had a deny, delay, depose. Okay? Yeah. Downplay the risk of burning fossil fuels to protect their business. Just like WSPA's oilmen of the 1950s, compelling new evidence shows this pattern of behavior was already hardwired into the industry's DNA by 1955, and it persists today. Doesn't matter how many commercials they put out that they're all about solar power, which, that's really not going to do anything anyway in the long run. But, they'll say whatever to make themselves look good. Outraged, LA citizens still suffer from smog. A Los Angeles Times headline in December 1952 cried out. So we're going back a little bit. That fall had seen Southern California experience its most prolonged air pollution siege, suffering 5 straight weeks of smog that published public anger to the boiling point. Thick, acrid, and irritating to the eyes and lungs, smog had plagued Los Angeles' once idyllic corner of the southwestern U.S. since 1943, when during World War II, the sudden arrival of a blanket of noxious fumes had been mistaken for an enemy gas attack. That's how bad it was. Obscuring the sun, smog reduced visibility to less than a few blocks, caused fatal traffic accidents, halted movie production, confined children indoors, and canceled sporting events. On bad smog days, emergency rooms saw higher deaths from heart or lung disease, and rates of asthma and bronchitis increased. Smog also damaged property and ruined crops. Angry citizens soon demanded action, pointing to the highly visible stack gases emitted daily by Los Angeles County's many oil refineries. To deflect blame away from the industry, in 1947, WSPA established an internal smoke and fumes committee chaired by William L. Stewart, Jr., a vice president of Union Oil, now Chevron now. Through the committee, WSPA sponsored smog studies at the Stanford Research Institute, downplaying the industry's role. By 1950, however, Caltech chemist Ari Hagen-Schmidt had identified hydrocarbon pollution from oil fields, refineries, filling stations, and automobiles as the primary source of smog. Using this emerging science, county authorities developed plans to enforce pollution controls. In response, oil industry leaders dialed up their anti-regulatory, sound familiar? Counteroffensive, dismissing Hagen-Smith's findings as unproved speculation, and citing their own SRI research to claim that the substances responsible for smog had not been positively identified. WSPA, now aided by the Oil Company Industries National Association, the American Petroleum Institute, argued to delay regulatory action and recommended expanding research into the causes of smog instead. Oh, let's do some more science just to be sure. That sound familiar? Huh? Okay. Meanwhile, the smog crisis intensifies. Taking matters into their own hands, a group of independent LA citizens established the Pure Air Committee, holding public meetings that sought legal remedies to combat air pollution. Big Oil's strategy of relying on SRI's industry-funded research to stem the tide of bad publicity and prevent regulation was failing. The policeman is coming, an executive of Union Oil warned API at the group's mid-year meeting. So, yeah, they're trying everything they can to block knowledge and action. Foundation for War on Smog. It was out of this battle that WSPA formed the Air Pollution Foundation, APF, in September 1953. An official account of the foundation's origins stated that a group of unnamed civic leaders gathered to discuss what they could do to eliminate smog. According to this official version of events, it was obvious that more facts concerning the nature and origin of smog were necessary before proper controls could be invoked. Oh my God. You know, it almost like makes you really sick, right? However, Hitchcock's confidential memo written in the aftermath of his 1955 California club meeting reveals that senior WSPA officials and oil industry executives were among this group of civic leaders, and that this APF was, in fact, intended as a vehicle for publishing supposedly unbiased findings. By filtering information concerning the nature and origin of smog through a foundation staffed with reputable scientists as well as its own representatives, WSPA hoped to win public credibility among LA's angry citizens, stall regulation, and protect the industry's bottom line. This was a tactic that the U.S.'s heavy industries had used since the 1930s to fight worker health and safety reforms. You know, they didn't want OSHA, right? Anything that makes them spend money that they don't want to spend is blocked. Okay. However, the oil and gas industry, finding themselves directly in the regulatory firing line, now repurpose the same technique for their own agenda. At first, everything seemed to go according to plan. Foundation set up for war on smog. That's in quotes. A November 7th, 1953, LA Times headline stated, heralding the APF's official launch. The paper reported that more than 75 businessmen, industrialists, civic leaders, churchmen, and government officials had announced a community-wide long-range program for tackling the smog crisis. A list of the APF's trustees revealed a cross-section of the city's most influential figures, including the heads of Southern California's most prestigious academic institutions, retail magnates, founders of the state's leading banks, and the presidents of SoCal Gas, Southern California Edison, and Union Oil, acquired by Chevron in 2005. According to the Foundation's statement of policy, these board members who represented polluting industries had a particular responsibility to ensure that they would be parties to all facts and evidence brought to light on the problem. In other words, they didn't want anything to get past them. so that they and their colleagues in the fossil fuel industry could continue their best efforts toward the abatement of air pollution. In reality, these efforts would fall short, but for the moment, WSPA's prototype front group received a warm welcome in the press, which heralded the APF as a citizens group. You got to recognize that there's a lot of this kind of thing out there. I'm going to have to find more that shows that a lot of these organizations, PR groups, they're all greenwash, whitewash. That's most of what they are. Okay. Follow the money. Behind the scenes, documents show that the oil and gas industry was the APF's largest funder by far, making annual contributions of approximately $200,000, equivalent to $2.4 million today. 1955 oil companies contributed $200,000 out of the foundation's total income of $348,000. Throughout the foundation's 6-year existence, WSPA members contributed over a third of the APF's total income, totaling $1.3 million, which is about $14 million today. But which companies were behind WSPA's funding of the APF? A November 1954 APF press release is the only surviving document revealing the identity of these individual oil and gas companies. The list includes General Petroleum, Humble Oil, or Exxon, Richfield Oil, BP, Shell, Southern California Edison, Southern California Gas Company, SoCal in other words, Sunray Oil, which is Sunoco now, or was, Tidewater, ConocoPhillips, and Standard Oil of California, the Texas Company, Union Oil, and Western Gulf, all now Chevron. With the money came influence, starting with the APF's choice of president. The chairman of Standard Oil of Indiana, now BP, scouted universities for recommendations, but it was an APF trustee with ties to Standard Oil of California, Chevron, who eventually recruited Loren B. Hitchcock, the East Coast chemical engineer and World War I Naval Aviation Corps veteran, to serve as president of APF. With his track record of working for the chemical industry, Hitchcock likely appeared a safe pair of hands to run a front group for the Big Oil. Unanimously approved by APF's trustees, he relocated his family from New York to Los Angeles, where he began formulating the APF's research program. From the start of Hitchcock's tenure, oil and gas industry representatives were omnipresent in the foundation's operations. Sounds like the COP meetings that we have now, right? Run by oil companies and oil countries. Okay, let me start again. From the start of Hitchcock's tenure, oil and gas industry representatives were omnipresent in the foundation's operations as consultants or members of important APF committees. However, despite these guardrails, Hitchcock would turn out to be more independent-minded than oil industries had hoped. Meanwhile, as each month passed, the air pollution crisis in Southern California deepened. Crowd overflows smog meeting, warned in October 54 LA Times headline. 10 consecutive days of smog had resulted in mass civic protest in the region, and on October 20th, a crowd of 4,500 smog-weary citizens attended a meeting at the Pasadena Civic Auditorium where speakers outlined plans for a citizens' movement. A few weeks later, on November 16, 1954, Hitchcock unveiled the Foundation's ambitious 12-month research program, billed as unprecedented in scope. The program focused on investigating the fundamental causes of smog and developing technology to reduce pollution from automobiles. Among the dozens of research projects listed, only one related specifically to exploring refinery emissions, even though refineries in the area contributed an estimated 33% to LA's total air pollution, CO2, and climate change. Tucked away at the end of the 12-month research program under the category of fundamental research in physics, meteorology, and chemistry, the APF quietly listed a project that would lead to one of the most important scientific discoveries of the 20th century, study of carbon isotopes. A few months earlier, in September 1954, the APF's research committee had asked Caltech to submit a proposal for studying the source of aerial carbon compounds, hoping it would determine whether gasoline combustion products or the burning of rubbish were responsible for LA's carbon pollution. If burning trash proved to be the major source of the city's carbon pollution, the fossil fuel industry might not be blamed for the smog problem. Responding to the APF's request on November 15, 1954, Caltech's Samuel Epstein, associate professor of geochemistry, submitted a research proposal outlining how recent scientific advances applied to carbon dioxide samples might tell researchers more about the sources of air pollution. But what the APF got from Epstein may have been more than they bargained for. As well as offering a possible contribution to the solution of the smog problem, Epstein's proposal outlined how Caltech's study could be used to predict the future. Increasing concentrations of atmospheric CO2 by burning fossil fuels might affect the Earth's climate, wrote Epstein, describing the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere as a matter of well-recognized importance to our civilization. He emphasized that the possible consequences of a changing concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere with reference to climate may ultimately prove of considerable significance to civilization. Here he's got this, it's typed and it's very small. One of the more interesting results obtained is a consistent increase of the C12 content in recent years. Since 1840, the carbon isotope ratio, and he writes a ratio here, has increased in the trees so far investigated. This can be explained on the basis of a change in carbon ratio in the carbon dioxide atmosphere resulting from burning of C12 rich coal and petroleum. The possible consequences, excuse me, like I said, it's really small typing. The possible consequences of a changing concentration of the CO2 in the atmosphere with reference to climate, rates of photosynthesis, and rates of equilibrium with carbonate of the oceans say ultimately prove of considerable significance to civilization. Okay, let me read that last part again. The possible consequences of changing concentration of the CO2 in the atmosphere with reference to climate, rates of photosynthesis, and rates of equilibration with carbonate of the oceans say ultimately prove of considerable significance to civilization. It's worded a little weird, but may ultimately prove, not say. They showed a piece of the actual paper he had typed, so it's very small typing. Epstein's proposal to the APF warned of possible significance to civilization. Credit: Papers of Samuel Epstein, Caltech Archives. Read the entire document on Document Cloud. You can do that. Epstein proposed a thorough investigation. To do this, Caltech researcher would gather atmospheric samples of CO2 over the ocean, over mountains areas, and from industrial localities similar to Los Angeles Basin. As previously revealed by DSMOG, APF funding this project underwrote the earliest studies on CO2 conducted in 1955 and 56 by Charles David Keeling, then a young postdoctoral researcher at Caltech. This research paved the way for Keeling's later revelatory findings on global atmospheric CO2 and publication of the iconic Keeling curve, which charts how the level of atmospheric CO2 is rising due to the effects of burning fossil fuels. Keeling's work, which has been used by climate researchers from James Hansen, who testified in Congress in the 1980s about global warming, to Michael Mann, creator of the famous hockey stick graph showing temperature rise from burning fossil fuels during the industrial era, underpins our understanding of man-made climate change. WSPA knew. Okay. In late 1954, Caltech's research proposal moved quickly up the Foundation's chain of command, informing oil and gas industry representatives of CO2's potential climate danger at each stage of the approval process. First, the APF's research committee, which included SoCalGas President F.M. Banks, endorsed the study, Next, the APF's Board of Trustees, with its representatives from Union Oil, Chevron, and Southern Cal Edison, approved the proposal's funding. A few months later, in 1955, the APF shared Caltech's CO2 warning widely among its supporters in the first technical progress report, repeating the message that CO2 emissions from burning fossil fuels could seriously impact the atmosphere. Okay, this was way back then, and it's all due to oil company, fossil fuel companies' research, okay, that they funded. According to the President Hitchcock's official annual statement later that year, copies of all the Foundation's reports printed to date, which were also available to the public, had been sent to its trustees and contributors. This shows that WSPA and its major dues-paying members, including Shell, SoCal Gas, and Southern California Edison, as well as the companies owned or later acquired by Chevron, ExxonMobil, ConocoPhillips, and BP, were all warned 70 years ago that the product they profited from could pose a threat to the stability of Earth's climate. During the mid-1950s, scientific understanding of the greenhouse gas effect was increasing among climate researchers who published their findings outside of the academia in publications such as the New York Times and the Times Magazine. However, these APF documents are the first to show that the oil industry was directly informed of the link during this period. Nevertheless, it seems this information was something the industry might ultimately have preferred to keep private. California Club Showdown. In the months prior to the California's club summons, Hitchcock had been busy. In February 1955, he had urged state leaders to take action on refinery pollution, encouraging the Bay Area to start an air pollution control program built on knowledge gained from Los Angeles smog problem. Then in March 1955, the APF First Technical Progress Report outlined the possible climate risks caused by burning fossil fuels and featured an APF refinery emissions audit showing higher pollution levels than those previously reported by the WSPA-sponsored CRI. And in early April, during a hearing of the California State Senate in Sacramento, Hitchcock publicly testified in favor of state-funded fact-finding efforts on air pollution. 2 days later, frustrated WSPA leaders summoned him to the California Club. At the meeting, Philip S. Magruder, chairman of the WSPA's Smoke and Fumes Committee and executive vice president of General Petroleum, ExxonMobil, told Hitchcock the committee was questioning the advisability of the foundation calling attention to refinery stack gases or publicizing them. P.S. Magruder and the Western Oil and Gas Association, precursor to WSPA, and APF President Lauren B. Hitchcock reviewing the SRI smog study. I'm sorry, they're describing the picture above. Sorry. All right. Next, George Davison, Vice President of the Standard Oil Company of California, Chevron, stated it was his understanding that sulfur dioxide, SO2, from refineries was actually beneficial to plants and people in the amounts presently emitted. This even though by 1955 scientists had already identified sulfur dioxide as harmful to plants and human health, sometimes even lethal. Davidson endorsed Magruder's view that the foundation should not investigate such refinery emissions, criticizing Hitchcock's San Francisco speech for calling attention to a growing Bay Area air pollution problem. Finally, WSPA brought out their big gun, William L. Stewart, Jr., Vice President of Union Oil, Chevron, now Chairman of the National Smoke and Fumes Committee for the API, who revealed some important truths about the oil industry's sponsorship of the foundation. First, Stewart complained that the APF was attempting to cover too broad a program of research before divulging that he and others present had been part of the group which formed the foundation. As chairman of the WSPA Smoke and Fumes Committee at the time the APF had been created, Stewart told Hitchcock it was WSPA's understanding that in diverting substantial funds to the foundation, the APF would serve as the research department for the oil industry, that it would be of a protective nature, publishing findings which would be accepted as unbiased, whereas the industry's own findings were seen as favorable to its interest. In short, he conveyed that the WSPA did not want the APF to concern itself with refinery emissions, but should just stick to research. As for Hitchcock's own role, Stewart told Hitchcock that WSPA expected the APF president to act as the research director for the oil industry. And there's very small print there, it's telling something, but surprised and disappointed, Hitchcock referred the matter to the Foundation's executive committee, requesting they consider how WSPA's basic misunderstanding of the Foundation's purposes might be resolved. The resolution came soon enough, but not as Hitchcock had hoped. Another recently recovered set of documents, written less than a week after the meeting, shows Union Oil executive Vance N. Jenkins condemning the APF's entire research program. In a memo sent to Stewart, Jenkins denigrated every single APF project except for one, its proposal to establish a first-class public information bureau to give the public so-called definite facts, approved by oil industry executives, about the smog problem. According to Jenkins, this was the purpose for which the Foundation was established, and the only aspect of its activity he could fully recommend. The following day, President of Union Oil and APF trustee Reese H. Taylor submitted Jenkins' damning memo to the Foundation's executive committee. Yeah, it's a little long, but records show that WSPA's efforts hit their target. From this point on, the oil industry exerted tighter control over the APF's activities. At a special meeting of the Executive Committee on April 13, 1955, unnamed participants put forward a proposal for a new scientific subcommittee to advise on technical matters, whose members should be selected from organizations such as the American Petroleum Institute, the Western Oil and Gas Association. By July, the APF had duly installed this new Technical Advisory Committee, which included representatives from API and Richfield Oil, or BP. In line with Union Oil's suggestion, APF research projects were scaled back, focusing exclusively on automobile emissions, often conducted jointly with the API. After 1955, APF-sponsored research was increasingly used to lobby county authorities against clean air regulations or to boost the oil and gas industry's public image. APF newsletters and reports also emphasized the high cost of pollution control, arguing that regulation would have negative economic impacts, and repeated the mantra that more research was necessary before regulatory action should be taken. Yeah, like let's just keep researching and never do anything with it, right? Before regulatory action should be taken. Additionally, from March 56, records show that WSPA issued a series of direct requests that the APF focus exclusively on public relations instead of air pollution research. Finding himself increasingly sidelined to a fundraising role and at odds with WSPA's intentions, Hitchcock resigned as president and managing director in 1756. His successor, W.L. Faith, had ties to the API and would steer the Foundation in line with WSPA's demands. After resigning, Hitchcock moved back east, where he joined the faculty at the University of Buffalo's Engineering School and founded his own air pollution consulting firm, Harmless Carbon Dioxide. Following WSPA's California Club intervention, APF publications reviewed by smog made no further reference to CO2's potential impact on the Earth's climate. These subsequent APF reports also did not explain the implications of the Keeling's Caltech findings for advancing scientific understanding of the atmospheric changes caused by burning fossil fuels, even though APF members had been explicitly warned that these changes might ultimately prove of considerable significance to civilization. While APF publications reported some of Keeling's findings, principally that CO2 in the LA atmosphere increased mainly as a direct result of combustion, and that approximately 2/3 of this overall CO2 was traceable to the combustion of petroleum products, these APF reports did not mention the potential long-term impacts of fossil fuel-generated CO2 emissions. Moreover, in what might be some of the earliest known examples of climate denial, APF reports that followed declared CO2 to be innocuous. Additionally, individual industry representatives affiliated with WSPA also denied the potential harmfulness of CO2, setting a precedent for an oil industry practice that would be repeated over the following decades. At the U.S. Public Health Service's November 1958 National Conference on Air Pollution in Washington, D.C., Shell executive Charles A. Jones, a WSPA and API air pollution expert who had formerly served on the APF's Technical Advisory Subcommittee, publicly described CO2 as harmless. In stark contrast, one of the conference's keynote speakers had earlier that same day discussed the potential climate consequences of CO2 emissions, such as global warming, the melting of polar ice caps, and rising sea levels. Asked about Jones's statement, Shell told DSMOG the company had nothing to add. The APF disbanded at the end of 1960 without fanfare. According to its official history, the foundation had fulfilled its mission, despite its failure to resolve the smog problem in California. In reality, however, by 1961, air pollution regulation was expanding across the U.S., turning the oil and gas industry's pollution control problem into a national issue. Consequently, the industry's National Trade Association, the API, became increasingly active in both air pollution research and in working to prevent emissions limiting regulation of the oil industry. From the 1950s up to today, the oil and gas industry has used the playbook that it first deployed through the APF, funding apparently independent research via third-party community groups to fight against air pollution legislation and climate action. These efforts have repeatedly stalled clean air and climate regulations. At the same time, oil and gas companies have leveraged this research spending to boost their public image as a responsible partner in the search for climate and/or clean air solutions and to promote voluntary measures or technological fixes in place of legally mandated pollution controls. WSPA's member companies, including BP, Chevron, ExxonMobil, and Shell, funded outright climate denial via their membership in the Global Climate Coalition, GCC, which operated from 1989 to 2001. The GCC built on the APF legacy by sponsoring its own independent research and using industry-funded studies to promote climate denial, lobbying the UN official scientific advisory body and international panel on climate change. This derailed international efforts to prevent the catastrophic impacts of climate change. In 1998, an API, Exxon, and Chevron approved Global Climate Science Communication Action Plan included forming a global climate science data center, which bore an even closer resemblance to the APF. According to the plan, the center would function as a nonprofit educational foundation with an advisory board of respected climate scientists, staffed initially with professionals on loan from various companies and associations with a major interest in the climate issue, who would fund research designed to fill the gaps in climate science. Victory will be achieved when average citizens recognize, in other words, they wrote that, uncertainties in climate science. Announced the action plan, echoing the APF's 1954 declaration. While there is much we don't know about smog, there are some definite facts which have not been made clear to the public. We should inform them fully as to all that is really known. Even in the 21st century, WSPA and its members companies continue to influence public opinion and to block clean air regulations and state climate initiatives through third-party front groups like Californians for Energy Independence and Californians Against Higher Taxes, which have used industry-sponsored research to battle even modest reforms. In 2014, a leaked PowerPoint presentation revealed WSPA support for more than a dozen front groups, which many still actively oppose climate policy a decade later. Last month, WSPA was named as a defendant in an Oregon climate lawsuit for its support of front groups listed in leaked presentation. The complaint alleges that WSPA funded the front group as part of a multi-million-dollar public relations campaign to further the oil industry's propaganda machine. Today, some 70 years after the Air Pollution Foundation's launch, the communities surrounding Los Angeles refineries persistently suffer severe public health impacts from fossil fuel emissions. At the same time, the region continues to experience some of the country's worst air quality. As a state, California is also the second highest emitter of CO2 in the U.S. Nationally, oil industry-funded groups like Natural Allies for a Clean Energy Future or the Partnership to Address Global Emissions advocate for using natural methane gas by sponsoring and publicizing industry-friendly research boosting gas as a climate solution. These new Air Pollution Foundation documents show how WSPA and its member companies played a central role in establishing the tradition of the oil industry's deceptive tactics. Now, five major oil companies, Chevron, ExxonMobil, BP, ConocoPhillips, and Shell, as well as the API, American Petroleum Institute, are being sued for the use of such tactics in the landmark California versus Big Oil lawsuit, part of the landscape of litigation launched by former presidential candidate Kamala Harris. Oh, I know, there's probably a lot of people going to have a fit about that, right? Despite functioning as a pioneer in the evolution of these tactics, WSPA has not been named as a defendant in the California suit. Commenting on the lawsuit, a Shell spokesman told DeSmog that the company does not believe the courtroom is the right venue to address climate change, but that smart policy from government and action from all sectors is the appropriate way to reach solutions and drive progress. Neither WSPA nor API responded to a request for comment by DeSmog. This piece first appeared on DeSmog. Okay. Rebecca John is a research fellow at the Climate Investigations Center. She is also a freelance journalist and award-winning documentary filmmaker. As a producer and director of the acclaimed Extreme Oil, Curse of Oil, because it is a curse, series of PBS and BBC, her work was awarded a Sin Golden Eagle for news analysis. There's more, but okay. It's really hard to keep track of some of those abbreviations, etc. Excuse me. But if you play little parts of the whole thing over and over, you might be able to get a sense. So it just shows you what's been going on for decades to hide the fact that, yes, fossil fuels were great. They made our lives easier. They fed us more. They increased our comfort. They kept children alive by helping to make medicines, etc., etc. But what people don't get is all we're trying to do, our faction of things, doomers, I suppose you could say. What we're trying to do is show people that that was all great. And it increased our species, spread our species over the whole planet, but also spread destruction, biosphere destruction, and it's only going to get worse. So if we continue, we're going to continue to use fossil fuels, no matter what people say about renewables, because it takes fossil fuels to make renewables, it takes fossil fuels to make an EV car. And I read years ago, and I've read it since, generating electricity for civilization to run only takes 18% of our total energy use. So if you're only replacing fossil fuels towards our transportation, that's a lot of it, right? The running of a car, or a bus, etc. You're only reducing our overall energy use and therefore the production of CO2 by 18%. We can't afford any CO2 in the atmosphere. We can't afford any. There's so much up there, you have no idea. I'm going to have to run some numbers, get articles that tell how much is up there. But people say, well, what about volcanoes? I read years ago that the amount of CO2 spewed by one volcano is about 0.5 gigatons. Globally, we put out 40 gigatons of CO2 every single year. Yes, the oceans and trees absorb some, but it's completely out of balance now. There's not, and we keep reducing our trees and our green spaces. We keep reducing them by massive amounts. So the balance is even worse because we're losing our ability to reabsorb that CO2. So having read that, those two situations, it kind of shows that they don't plan on doing anything different. You know, yeah, you could put out some solar panels and wind turbines and make it look good, right? But that's not going to change anything. And it just, sticks a little Band-Aid on situation. People say, oh, grow some more trees. You can't make a forest in 20 years. It doesn't work that way. The forest, what's underneath between those trees, cannot be replaced. It takes hundreds, if not thousands of years to make the ecosystems that those forests came from. So people say, well, what's a human to do? Nothing at this point. I'm sorry. Not much. You can do what makes you feel good. Reduce, reduce, reduce. I mean, not going to change anything in the long run, but it might make your soul feel better. Okay? Live closer to the land and learn as much as you can. That's the key. Try to understand. I mean, if there's any life after death, it just goes to show that, maybe your soul will have some kind of redemption if you learn enough and kind of mitigate your own footprint, right? Instead of, oh, let's run to the mall and buy all kinds of, thousands of dollars worth of Christmas presents or hundreds and hundreds of dollars. I've never been able to do that, but, a little, but nothing like that. I mean, I started realizing in the 2000s, the aughts, that our consumer society was just ridiculous. When I started learning about peak oil, I just looked at the grocery stores, I looked at the mall, and I had young girls, and they wanted to go to the mall. We went like once or twice, about twice a year. I finally got them convinced to buy some secondhand clothes, but, you just look around and you're just like, when you learn this stuff, the destruction behind every single product, right? And it just makes you cringe. We went down the wrong path when we decided, way back when we decided to do agriculture. Oh, there goes another, moan from the crowd. Yes, agriculture was a bad idea. Hunter-gatherers roaming from one space to another, hunting and gathering herbs and whatever vegetables they could find along the way was the way humans should have stayed. Sorry, but the planet would have been fine if we'd done it. Even if we had continued subsistence farming, stayed away from some of the military stuff that happened later, because they took so much wood to make ships way back when. But anyway, if we just stayed with subsistence farming, we still would have been kind of okay. It was the fossil fuels that put everything on steroids. And maybe we would have run into issues with subsistence farming, but it would have taken a hell of a lot longer. But fossil fuels, we can always have too much of something good, right? And that's what we've done. We've just, everybody wants what they want, and it's just really, really destructive. I would love for people to get on and discuss this. So again, when you're reading the description of Aquarius, the one main sign that represents humanity, and Pluto being there, what is that telling you? Knowing the trajectory, knowing the science, you cannot just interpret astrology and think you know what's going to happen without understanding the science. They have to go together. They have to go together. Otherwise, you're just pulling at myths. Myths symbolize reality, so you have to incorporate the reality. Okay. And again, the planets and the signs are our mirrors, showing what's going on with us. I know that's probably difficult for people that come here and just straight scientifically oriented. We don't know why it seems to match, but it does. It correlates. The movements of the planets correlate to what's going on here. You can only know that if you study for a long time. Just like you can only understand climate science or planetary overshoot if you study it. If you don't study it, you're not going to understand why things are so dire, and you're not going to understand why somebody is a doomer. I used to say, I'm a doomer because I know nothing constructive will be done. Renewables are extremely destructive in the long run. They're not going to save anything. The mining and extraction and the making of cement, it's just outrageous. And then we've got the people pushing more nuclear again. So what do you think? I mean, what do people really think out there? Come on and join in and discuss this. And I could put more articles out here for people to read. So I will put the links on for those articles that I read. And I did want to discuss Mars retrograde in Leo. We know Leo is about the ruler, the king, the leader, right? Mars retrograde as of today. And it goes direct in February, the 23rd, 24th. It's all the way back in Gemini and comes all the way back through Cancer. What's that telling us? Retrograde in Leo. It turns retrograde in Leo. Something to do with the leader and something going backwards or turning around, right? So now, Mars is transiting through our president-elect's 12th house. We know the 12th house has to do with a few things like secret enemies, okay? People can take that either way, but I'm going to explain. People behind the scenes, on both sides, if you ask me, trying to, use their strategy somehow to do what they want without him realizing. Another thing, Mars in the 12th, his ability to take action is possibly muted or diluted. Thank goodness. That's where I stand, okay? I hope. There may be other things that are going on with this Mars retrograde in the sign of the leader. And I am pretty worried, pretty worried about the entrance of Saturn and Neptune into Aries and entering the 4th house of the United States. To me, Saturn is definitive. It defines, right? In Aries, it defines your identity, right? And it's in the 4th house of the United States chart, which is the homeland, the domestic land, right? And you think, well, okay, people might orient toward defining themselves as a United States citizen in a positive way, according to what the Constitution calls for. And the rule of law, Saturn, right? So we'll stick to the way we've generally viewed the Constitution and the norms of the rule of law. But then Neptune comes, we don't know, it might play out negatively with Saturn and Aries. It could be all about me, okay? Then you've got Neptune coming along, and Neptune diffuses everything. Now that could be, oh, we all unite in kumbaya, and we're all one. We're all one. This is great, right? We're all American, right? I don't know about that. I can't see it. I really can't see it. The other part of that would be more delusion about who we are, right? And Saturn can be the divider, too. It puts up boundaries, puts up walls, right? So Saturn and Aries could be walls and boundaries between us. The Neptune coming along, melting those, or just confusing people more. I don't know. They can always go both ways. There's different factions everywhere. So there's not just two sides, ever. Okay? There's different factions within. The left has many different factions. The right has many different factions. So I would love to say that what I'm doing would enlighten people enough that they could understand, and maybe as we go down, we could treat each other with respect and treat each other with caring and support. Hopefully. Yeah. To believe in our humanness, our humane orientations, to believe in being the best human you can be. And that would include caring about the rest of the beings on this planet, not just about other humans, but about the woodchuck and about the wolves and about, because there's two ways to look at it. Yes, all of those things, all of those beings are important for us to live. You know, as we keep losing biodiversity, that means our chances of surviving are less and less. You've got the bees and insects in general, their numbers being reduced drastically since 1970. But there's also the right of those beings to live just because they're here. Just like a human, you know, is alive and has to have respect. You have to have respect for the deer. Yes, people can hunt deer to keep their numbers down because they can't overpopulate. It would destroy them. But you must keep in mind that when we're digging and extracting and polluting, we're destroying those animals because humans want something. Humans want, you know, refrigerators, and humans want to go to a football game on an airplane. Humans want makeup. So you're tearing apart the planet to make these things just because humans want it. If I could get that across to people, that we want too much. Humans want too much. And this is why we're at the place we're at. Give it another 5 to 10 years, and it'll be even much more evident how awful we've made things. And forget about 20 years. You know, it's really, yeah. So I'm going to give up for tonight. And anybody who wants to discuss this, be my guest. Make your comments. And we can get into more astrology. I know sometimes I don't cover a whole lot of astrology, but I'm really into the paradigm thing here with the outer planets a lot, because they really shape our species. You know, the transits of the personal planets, etc. The bridge planets, Jupiter and Saturn, have a lot to do with it. But the personal planets, faster planets, are triggers for the outer planet transits. Okay, so when they make particular positions and aspects, they start or trigger the effects of the outer planets. I read that years ago. Okay, I'm done. Everyone, have a good couple of days. Maybe I'll make another one of these soon. I'm trying to get better at being more often. Take care, and thank you for watching Astrologer Climate Witness. Take care. Bye.